In 2007, I inherited a small commercial property in Portland, Oregon, from my Aunt Margaret. It was a modest two-story brick building in the Pearl District, with a coffee shop on the ground floor and 2 apartments upstairs. The whole thing was worth about $340,000 at the time. I was 52 years old, working as a registered nurse at Providence Hospital, and for the first time in my life, I owned something that could actually be called an asset. I need to tell you how I got to that point because the details matter. My Aunt Margaret never married, never had children. She bought that building in 1979 for $65,000, back when the Pearl District was just old warehouses and nobody wanted to live there. She ran a small bookstore on the ground floor for 30 years. When she died of pancreatic cancer in March 2007, she left the building to me. Not to my brother, not split between us, just to me. Her will was very specific about that. The coffee shop tenant had a long-term lease. The 2 apartments upstairs brought in $1,800 a month total. After property taxes and maintenance, I was clearing about $1,500 a month in passive income. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was mine. I had the deed put in my name only. I didn't tell anyone at work. I didn't post about it on Facebook. I just quietly collected the rent checks and deposited them into a separate bank account I'd opened just for this purpose. Then, I met Richard. This was August 2008. I was 53. He was 58, recently divorced, working as a regional manager for a commercial cleaning company. We met at a hospital charity fundraiser. He was charming, attentive, had good manners. He told me about his difficult divorce, how his ex-wife had taken most of their savings in the settlement. He said he was starting over, building his life back up. I felt sorry for him. I was also lonely. My marriage had ended 15 years earlier, and I'd been single ever since. We dated for 6 months. He was romantic in the beginning. Flowers on Fridays, dinner at nice restaurants. He'd pick me up from my shifts at the hospital, even the late ones. He met my friends. I met his daughter, Amanda, who was 31 and worked in real estate. She was polite, but distant. I didn't think much of it at the time. Richard started talking about moving in together around February 2009. The economy was falling apart. The housing market was collapsing. He said his rent was going up, and it didn't make sense for us to pay for 2 places when we spent most nights together anyway. I agreed. He moved into my apartment in March. I didn't tell him about the building. I know how that sounds, but something in my gut told me to keep it to myself. Maybe it was the way he'd talked about his ex-wife and the divorce settlement. Maybe it was the way his daughter Amanda had looked at me that first time, sizing me up like I was trying to take something from her father. Or maybe it was just that my Aunt Margaret had chosen to leave that building to me alone, and I wanted to honor that by keeping it separate from whatever this relationship was going to become. Richard moved in with his clothes, his furniture, his life. He contributed $600 a month toward rent and utilities, which was fair. He was affectionate. We traveled a little, took a trip to the Oregon coast, another one to Vancouver. He talked about marriage. In November 2009, he proposed. It wasn't elaborate. We were having dinner at home, and he just asked me. He didn't have a ring. He said we could pick one out together. I said yes. We got married in January 2010 at the courthouse. Small ceremony. A few friends as witnesses. His daughter Amanda came, wearing a navy suit and a tight smile. After the ceremony, she hugged her father and shook my hand. That was it. That's when things started to change. The first time he asked me for money was in March, about 2 months after the wedding. He said he was short on his portion of the rent, something about unexpected car repairs. Could I cover him this month? He'd pay me back. I said okay. It was $600. Not a big deal. He didn't pay me back. In April, he said his daughter Amanda was starting her own real estate brokerage and she needed some startup capital. He'd promised to help her out. Could I lend him $3,000? He'd pay me back by the end of summer when he got his bonus from work. I hesitated. That was a lot of money, but she was his daughter, and I wanted to be supportive. I withdrew $3,000 from my savings and gave it to him. He didn't pay me back. By June, he'd stopped contributing to the rent altogether. When I brought it up, he got defensive. He said I was being petty, that married couples were supposed to share everything. He said his bonus had been smaller than expected because of the economy. He said Amanda's business was struggling and she needed more help. He made me feel guilty for even asking. Then there was his daughter. Amanda started coming over more often. At first, it was just Sunday dinners. Then it was twice a week. Then she had a key to our apartment and would let herself in while I was at work. I'd come home and find her and Richard sitting at the kitchen table with paperwork spread out, talking in low voices. When I'd walk in, they'd stop talking and shuffle the papers together. I asked Richard what they were working on. He said it was just family business, nothing for me to worry about. He said I wouldn't understand the real estate stuff anyway. That should have been my first warning. In September 2010, Amanda started asking me questions about my finances. How much did I make as a nurse? Did I have any investments? Any property? It was casual at first, over dinner, like she was just making conversation. But there was something calculated about it. She'd look at her father when she asked, like they were confirming something between them. I kept my answers vague. I said I was doing fine, that nursing paid well enough. Then one Sunday in October, Amanda brought up the Pearl District. She said she had a client looking to buy investment property in that area. She asked if I knew anyone who owned buildings there. She said the market was depressed right now, and it was a good time to buy. She asked if I'd ever thought about investing in real estate. I said no. I said I was happy just working and saving. Richard jumped in then. He said I was too conservative with money, that I needed to think bigger. He said Amanda could help me find good investment opportunities. He said married couples were supposed to help each other build wealth. I changed the subject. But after that, Amanda started pushing harder. She'd bring real estate listings to our apartment. She'd leave brochures about property investment on the kitchen counter. She'd talk about how much money people were making by buying undervalued properties and flipping them. Richard would nod along, agreeing with everything she said. I started spending more time at work, extra shifts, anything to avoid the Sunday dinners and the constant talk about money and investments. In December 2010, I came home from a night shift and found Richard and Amanda at the kitchen table again. This time, they didn't even stop talking when I walked in. Amanda was saying something about property records and county assessor's office. Richard was nodding. I asked what they were talking about. Amanda looked at me with this thin smile. She said she was helping her father organize his financial documents. She said it was important for married couples to have all their assets properly documented. I said we'd only been married 11 months. What assets? She didn't answer. She just gathered up her papers and left. That night, I checked my mail. There was a letter from the property management company that handled my building. They said they needed to confirm my mailing address for the year-end tax documents. They'd been sending statements to my old apartment address, the one I'd lived at before Richard moved in. I'd never updated it because I'd never told Richard about the building. I realized then that all my rental income statements, all my property tax bills, had been going to my old address for the past year. The new tenants there had probably just thrown them away. I'd been so careful about keeping that bank account separate, about not mentioning the building, that I'd completely forgotten about the mail. I drove to the property management office the next morning and updated my address. I asked them to send me copies of everything from the past year. When I got home, I hid the documents in my car. 2 weeks later, Richard came home excited. He said Amanda had found an incredible investment opportunity. A small commercial building in the Pearl District was going on the market. The owner was facing foreclosure. They could get it for $280,000, way below market value. He said if we could come up with $60,000 for a down payment, we could flip it in 2 years and make $200,000 profit, easy. I asked which building. He described it. 2-story brick building, coffee shop on the ground floor, 2 apartments upstairs. It was my building. I felt my stomach drop. I asked him how Amanda knew about this property. He said she had connections at the bank, that she knew which properties were about to go into foreclosure. He said this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, that we had to act fast. I asked him whose name was on that property currently. He didn't know. He said it didn't matter because it was going into foreclosure anyway. He said Amanda was already drawing up the paperwork for an offer. I told him I needed to think about it. He got angry. He said I was always like this, too scared to take risks, too conservative. He said his ex-wife had been the same way, and that's why he never got ahead financially during that marriage. He said I needed to trust him. That night, I couldn't sleep. I called my friend Janet, another nurse I'd worked with for 20 years. I told her everything: the building, the inheritance, keeping it secret, Richard and Amanda now trying to buy it. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said I needed to talk to a lawyer immediately. The next morning, I called a real estate attorney named Thomas Brennan. I made an appointment for that afternoon. I brought all my documents: the deed, the will from my aunt, the rental income statements, the property tax records. I told him the whole story. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said I had a serious problem. He said if Richard and Amanda were trying to purchase my building through fraudulent means, implying it was in foreclosure when it wasn't, that could be attempted fraud. He said if they succeeded and somehow got me to sign documents without knowing what I was signing, I could lose the property entirely. He said I needed to confront them immediately and make it clear that I knew what they were doing. I went home that evening. Richard was there with Amanda. They had paperwork spread out on the dining table. They'd already prepared an offer on the building. There were loan pre-approval documents. There were projected renovation costs. There was a timeline for flipping the property. I walked over to the table and looked at the papers. The address was there in black and white. My building. I asked Amanda where she'd gotten the information that this property was in foreclosure. She hesitated. Then she said she had sources at several banks who gave her advance notice on distressed properties. I asked her which bank held the mortgage on this particular property. She shuffled through some papers. She named a bank. I told her she was wrong. I told her there was no mortgage on that property. It was owned free and clear. It had been paid off in 1994. Richard jumped in. He said maybe I was confused, that Amanda was the real estate expert here, that she wouldn't make a mistake about something like this. I pulled out my phone. I pulled up a photo I'd taken of my deed that morning. I held it up so they could both see it. I said the property wasn't in foreclosure because I owned it. I'd owned it since March 2007. It was paid off. It generated $1,500 a month in rental income after expenses. And there was no way anyone was buying it because it wasn't for sale. The room went silent. Amanda's face went white, then red. Richard just stared at me like I'd grown a second head. Then Amanda exploded. She said I'd been lying to them for 3 years. She said I'd deceived her father. She said what kind of wife hides assets from her husband? She said this was financial fraud, that she could report me. I told her to go ahead and report me. I said keeping property that I'd inherited before marriage in my name only wasn't fraud. It was smart. Richard found his voice then. He said I'd made him look like a fool. He said he'd been telling Amanda how we were going to build wealth together, and all this time I'd been sitting on a $340,000 property and letting him struggle. He said I'd lied to him. I told him I'd never lied. I'd just never volunteered the information. And given what I was seeing right now, given that they'd been planning to somehow purchase my property out from under me, I'd made the right choice. Amanda started yelling. She said I was paranoid. She said they'd just been trying to help me, trying to include me in a good investment opportunity. She said I was ungrateful. I asked her how she'd planned to buy a property from someone who didn't know they were selling it. She didn't have an answer for that. Richard tried a different approach. He got quiet and sad. He said he was hurt that I didn't trust him. He said marriage was supposed to be a partnership. He said by keeping this secret, I'd betrayed him. I told him that by immediately trying to take financial advantage of me the moment he thought he'd found an opportunity, he'd betrayed me first. The argument went on for another hour. Amanda finally left, slamming the door behind her. Richard went into the bedroom and slammed that door too. I spent the night on the couch. The next morning, I called my lawyer again. I told him what had happened. He said I needed to protect myself immediately. He said even though Oregon is not a community property state, Richard could still try to claim some interest in the building based on the marriage. He said I needed to establish clear documentation that the property was separate property inherited before marriage. He also said I should seriously consider divorce. I filed the paperwork that week. Richard didn't contest it. I think he was too embarrassed. Or maybe Amanda advised him not to, since they'd essentially been caught trying to defraud me. The divorce was final in April 2011. 4 months after I'd discovered their plan. 15 months after we'd gotten married. I kept the building, of course. It was never community property to begin with. Richard moved out. He moved in with Amanda temporarily, which I found grimly appropriate. Here's the part that still bothers me. After the divorce, I found out more details. Amanda had been struggling financially. Her real estate business wasn't doing well. She'd borrowed money from Richard, money he didn't have, which is why he'd been borrowing from me. They'd concocted this scheme to find an undervalued property, get me to invest in it with them, then somehow flip it and split the profits. Except the property they'd chosen just happened to be mine. I don't think it was a coincidence. I think Amanda had done her research. I think she'd searched property records for the Pearl District, found my name on a deed, and realized her father's new wife owned something valuable. Then she and Richard had staged this elaborate charade about a foreclosure property, hoping I'd either invest money in buying my own building without realizing it, or that they could somehow manipulate me into signing documents that would give them partial ownership. My lawyer said they'd probably been planning to present me with a purchase agreement and tell me it was something else. Maybe rental paperwork or property management documents. Something I'd sign without reading carefully, especially if Richard was pressuring me and I trusted him. It was almost brilliant. If I hadn't happened to check my mail and update my address with the property management company, if I hadn't seen that letter when I did, I might never have known until it was too late. They were counting on me not knowing which building they were talking about, since I'd never told Richard I owned one. But because my Aunt Margaret had taught me to be careful, because she'd chosen to leave that building to me alone for a reason, I'd kept it separate. I'd kept it secret, and that secrecy had saved me. I never remarried after that. I dated occasionally over the years, but I never let anyone move in with me again. I never combined finances with anyone. I kept my building, kept collecting rent, kept it in my name only. The coffee shop tenants stayed for another 8 years, until 2018, when they retired and closed up. I renovated the space and leased it to a boutique fitness studio. The rent went up to $4,500 a month for that space alone. The 2 apartments upstairs got renovated too. I raised the rent to $1,400 each. By the time I retired from nursing in 2019, at age 64, that building was bringing in $7,300 a month gross. After expenses, I was clearing about $5,000 a month. Combined with my nursing pension and Social Security, I was more than comfortable. The building is worth about $1.2 million now. Even after the pandemic, the Pearl District became one of the most desirable neighborhoods in Portland. My Aunt Margaret's $65,000 investment in 1979 turned into something that secured my entire retirement. I heard through mutual friends that Richard and Amanda's relationship became strained after the divorce. Apparently, she blamed him for bungling the situation with me. He blamed her for the whole scheme in the first place. They stopped speaking for a few years. Richard eventually retired and moved to Arizona. I don't know if they ever reconciled. I'm 70 now. I still own the building. I've thought about selling it, but I can't bring myself to do it. It was my Aunt Margaret's, and she left it to me for a reason. She knew what it was like to be a woman alone, to need something that was entirely yours, that no one could take from you. She never married because she'd seen too many of her friends lose everything in divorces. She'd seen women who'd built businesses with their husbands, only to lose those businesses when the marriages ended. She'd seen women who'd trusted their husbands to manage the money, only to find out decades later that there was nothing left. So she stayed single. She bought her building, she ran her bookstore, she lived independently, and when she died, she made sure I'd have the same option. I think about that sometimes, about how different my life could have been if I'd told Richard about the building from the beginning. Would he have been different? Would he and Amanda have tried something else? Or would he have just been more direct about trying to take it from me? I'll never know. What I do know is this. When you have something valuable, something that gives you security and independence, you need to protect it. Not because you're paranoid or untrusting, but because you're smart. Because people will always surprise you, and not always in good ways. My Aunt Margaret knew that, and now I know it too. I don't have children to leave the building to. When I die, it'll go to a scholarship fund for nursing students, women specifically. Women who want a career that can support them, that can give them independence, that can't be taken away by a husband or a divorce or bad luck. Because that's what my aunt gave me. Not just a building, but a lesson. the lesson that you can love someone and still protect yourself, that you can be generous and still maintain boundaries. That trust has to be earned, not assumed. Richard used to say, I was too conservative, too scared to take risks. But keeping that building secret wasn't about being scared, it was about being wise. It was about understanding that the biggest risk isn't missing out on an opportunity. The biggest risk is trusting the wrong person with something you can't afford to lose. I learned that lesson the hard way, but I learned it in time. And that building in the Pearl District, the one my aunt bought for $65,000 in 1979, the one Richard and Amanda tried to take from me in 2010, is still mine. It's still generating income. It's still secure in my name only, and I sleep just fine at night.